Light pollution news, November 2025, tunable or standard? Oh, this is a good one. Joining me today are Tatsiana Thomson from Brome, journalist and author Lynne Peeples, and one of my favorite returning guests, John Barentine. This episode, we look at realistic drone shows, how one tribe in Arizona views the night sky, and we ask, does an increase in GDP necessarily mean a corresponding increase in light pollution? Settle in and enjoy. This episode of Light Pollution News is coming your way. Welcome to Light Pollution News. I'm your host, Bill McGeaney, and we do this show twice a month discussing the news around our vanishing nighttime environment. I'd like to welcome any new listeners with us today. Thank you for tuning in. As a reminder, you can find everything discussed today by heading over to lightpollutionnews.com. That includes all the links, read-along, summaries. Everything is right there at your fingertips. If you like what you hear today, you like the work we're doing here, why not support the show? Interested in learning more? Simply click the Support the Show link on your podcast player, show notes, or you can just head on over to our website, lightpollutionnews.com, and click Support the Show. I have one little piece here that I want to add in before we begin. You'll notice that I comically mispronounce Leicestershire as Leicestershire. This got a lot of laughs in the recent talk that I was part of. So just bear with me, enjoy it, and hopefully it brings a smile to your face every time you hear me butcher this county's name. So I'm very excited to have this slate of guests with me in this episode, and one of them just arrived in time for bird migration season. Tatsiana Thomson, I got to tell you this story. You're up there in Quebec. You're sales manager up there with Brome, and you make these really great little bird feeders. This past Friday, me and my wife got done work, and we walked down to a creek, and we saw 30 wood ducks just hanging out in the creek. I've never seen that density of wood ducks ever in my life. That was pretty cool to see. Welcome to the show, Tatsiana.
Seeing just one is pretty cool, you know. I think I've seen them twice ever, you know. So 30, that's something special.
Yeah, that was pretty neat. So welcome to the show, Tatsiana. How are you doing today?
No, thank you for having me. Well, I'm doing great. Sorry, I was just still gardening, filling my feeders. Yes, it's full on migration, so you never know who's going to show up. So you make sure that all those feeders are filled, and I don't clean up my backyard, so it's all the leaves is everywhere, brush piles. I got tons of dark-eyed juncos that showed up. My garden is covered in them because they're picking up whatever I didn't. So it's exciting times, and today it's really warm. So trying to spend as much time outside as possible because winter is certainly coming here soon.
Yeah, we got a lot of the palm warblers. See a lot of palm warblers, yellow rumps. I feel like they're a dime a dozen, but they're good to see.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've seen a lot of those, but we just got back from California too. And we saw juncos are nice here on the East Coast, but these like dark capped juncos they have out West.
Yes. They have a slightly different variety.
Yeah. Way better looking birds. Just, not trying to cast shade on these juncos, but they're way more interesting to see birds.
It's like chickadees, I love our black-capped chickadees, but the chestnuts, seeing anything that's out West, it's so different. And it's the same kind of continent, right? But the birds are so different.
Yeah, it's true. Well, next up for those listening, right around Dark Sky International's Under One Sky event, you'll surely recognize the name and the voice. With us today, we have a journalist who's written for one of my favorite publications, Scientific American, and recent stuff you've written for The Guardian coming out. She carries a biostatistics degree from Harvard School of Public Health and a science journalism degree from New York University. Let me welcome Lynne Peeples to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome, Lynne. We're going to talk about your new book, The Inner Clock, which is right here, nice and clean because I haven't read a page of it yet. I tend to destroy books too. It's not good. Stay tuned for the second show this month, and we'll go through some of that and some of the stuff she's covered in that book. But my third guest today is someone who actually needs no introduction. I could pretty much blow through this and you know who I'm talking about. You at home know the name, and I've been honored to have him with us a number of times. I think, John, you've been on the show more times than anyone else, which is pretty good because I get a lot of repeat guests back on the show. So let me welcome John Barentine to the show. And if by chance you aren't aware, John is an astronomer, a historian, author, science communicator, dark sky consultant, earned a PhD in astronomy from the University of Texas, and is a member of the American Astronomical Society, the International Astronomical Union, and he's known for Dark Sky Consulting's annual State of the Science report for Dark Sky International. Welcome back, John. How you doing?
Hey, I'm doing well, Bill. Thank you for having me back on, and it is equally an honor to be a guest.
Thank you. It's great to see you again. And last fall in the East Coast, when you have 5 clear nights, that's kind of the gold standard. That doesn't happen ever. And last fall, we had it right around the new moon. And I happened to be in a dark sky location. So I was thinking, hey, you know what? I've looked for deep sky objects, and I love looking for deep sky objects. It's fun. But what if I just took in the Milky Way, just took in the sky? And I got down this rabbit hole from the Astronomical League, which is it's a volunteer group of folks who come up with these great lists. It's kind of like a scavenger hunt for the sky. Anything you can imagine, they have a list of. But they had a list of these lost constellations. And I started digging around and started looking, trying to understand what these lost constellations were. And many of them were very faint. They were 6th magnitude, 5th magnitude stars, which translates over to stars that if you live in any urban area, you're never going to see. But if you live in suburban areas, you're never going to see. So it was pretty cool to see in a dark sky location some of these old lost constellations. And when I was doing my research on it, I came across a book written by John Barentine, this one here, The Lost Constellations. And this is a fascinating book, John. I can't believe I never knew about it. This book here really, trying to imagine some of these things is hard. Trying to picture where they are in the sky it depends what constellation was. Some was really hard. But I had no idea there was so much Polish and German history in constellations.
Now I'm really curious. You have to tell us more about which ones are actually lost and why are they lost?
To summarize the story in as few words as possible, there's a whole procedure that took place at the beginning of the 20th century where we whittled down 120, 130 constellations that had been described in the Western tradition over the previous few hundred years, down to 88 that exist now. Any chart you pull up, you will only find 88. And the process by which the decisions were made in terms of which were kept and which were discarded has a whole fascinating history unto itself. But as Bill suggests, part of the reason why they disappeared is that they're just not conspicuous. And if you live anywhere with the slightest amount of light pollution, you won't see them. So it's really a reflection of the time in which they were created, which was largely before the era of electric light. And they would have been much more prominent in the night sky. But the reasons that some were kept and some were discarded in that process are really fascinating. And they have everything to do with the geopolitics at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th, which is why there's so much German and Polish history in the book.
That blew my mind, the amount of political history there was around constellations. John, you did some great research there, which I would expect. And it was really fun to learn a lot about different things. I get the theme of most of our star cultures here in the West usually involve cats, dogs, and swans. Seems to be. I don't know why we have a comet swan. We have the Swan Nebula. We have a swan constellation. I don't know. I feel like wood ducks would be a much nicer one. But
hey, there are other birds too. There are a surprising number of animals among the constellations, but yeah, even birds.
Did you guys see this? There was at the Vatican, which apparently they had a really detailed, a really good drone show. It was during a Grace for the World concert. And the folks who attended were treated to music from Pharrell Williams, John Legend, Jelly Roll. You had Andrea Bocelli. It was a very eclectic lineup. Attendees saw this incredible drone show that featured, among things, joy spelled out at the top of St. Peter's Basilica. They also witnessed various depictions, including a very real depiction of the late Pope Francis's face, complete with realistic shadings. It was a really stunning drone show. A lot of times, in the light pollution world, people talk about light as being a nuisance or kind of an object of disdain. But here we have something that truly is art, I think. And it looked very well done. I'm curious about everyone's thoughts on something like that, a truly artistic drone show.
I checked the dates when this took place. And for me, it's, of course, a fall migration. I wonder how many birds were circling around and how many dead birds did they find afterwards. That's That's the first thing. It's beautiful, yes, but I do think about birds when it comes to a lot of light like this. I was traveling to Europe in the winter and, flying from Montreal and then kind of heading north. Everything was dark. And then around 6 a.m., we started going over Ireland and England. And I was absolutely shocked how much light I was seeing. Like 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, and it just continued and continued and continued. And, I haven't been over that area in a while. So it's really shocking to me because all I was thinking is like, oh my goodness, this is springtime. All the birds are migrating now from Africa. What is happening? Why there is so much light? So that's exactly when I saw that, to me, it was birds.
That's fair. Yeah.
No, I hadn't seen this at all until you pointed it out. And I mean, it's incredible, beautiful, but it brought back, for my book, I was researching all the wide array of various ways in which we pollute our skies. But a big thing that came out was, during Christmas time or the holidays, it seems like every year we have to one up ourselves, right? So we have all these really fancy holiday lights now on various streets. And there was a recent research out of Texas that actually found that like light on this University of Texas campus, which was primarily in the white and blue colors, was affecting, the wildlife population there. So more, if I recall, I think it was squirrels were getting, predators were getting more squirrels due to, this particular light. And, my focus is predominantly human health. But again, thinking about that and thinking about this light at night, well, maybe we could at least consider with our drones and with our Christmas lights, focusing it on warmer hues like reds and such that would have less of an impact. But anyway, it's a balance, right? I mean, beauty and inspiration is worth something too. So
art for the sake of art.
Yeah.
I would pick up on what Lynne just said about the balance that is to be struck. There's certainly a changing window of acceptability, if you will, is in terms of the things that people like, dislike, don't accept about the use of light at night for different reasons. And there's always, throughout the last century and a half of lighting history, there's been a push and pull with technology. So technology comes along and enables some use of light we haven't had before, and people find new and interesting and occasionally profitable ways to deploy that technology. And I think that's definitely what's going on here. As far as we know, these drone displays are not a tremendous source of light pollution, although very locally they might be. And to Tatsiana's point, the notion that this could be something that, is distracting to birds on migratory routes, that's very real. We have evidence to suggest that maybe not for drone shows particularly, but for light in general, that's a problem for birds that are migrating near cities. At the same time, people like this stuff, right? If we go around proclaiming ourselves to be light cops and saying, hey, we need to prioritize the birds above your other concerns, the things that you might like to have, we're not going to win many friends if we take that approach. To be honest, I'm not so concerned about the drone shows from a light perspective. I've seen some media reports about in the last year or two where some of these drone shows have gone very badly, with drones coming down and injuring people. So if anything, I think we should look at it from a public safety standpoint and think carefully about how we're doing this. And then maybe these concerns about the light will come along for the ride. My guess is that people would be more concerned about their own safety if they were at one of these shows than the degree to which they're worrying about the light aspect of it.
I haven't read those news reports, but it makes sense. I guess the question I have then on if we're talking about bird migration, bird safety, isn't this better than having fireworks?
Yes, for sure.
I mean, it's a step up. It's probably not perfect, but it might be able to kind of blend some, human need for the celebration and the contrast of darkness with bird safety. I don't know. And
you'd think the cats and the dogs and other wildlife probably would appreciate that as well. No more booms.
Yep.
Babies too, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I used to have to jump on my dog and hold her down when there were fireworks.
Oh.
Yeah, good times. Let's move on to something that you flagged, John. This is a story that you found that was from Mark Brody at KJZZ. Tribal communities in northern Arizona appear to be in line for protecting our nights. I've spoken about some of the cultural heritages of indigenous peoples with regards to the night. So why don't you take me through what drew you to this specific piece?
Part of it, of course, is that I'm from Arizona, and this is a topic that's increasingly important here, not only because Arizona is one of the states that I think in many respects is sort of leading with compared to others as far as dark skies. We have a lot of good dark sky ordinances out here. We have dark sky communities and parks, et cetera. The phenomenon of Native American or more generally indigenous people expressing their support for dark skies is a relatively new phenomenon, only in that the dark sky community didn't do a great amount of outreach until relatively recently. And this story in particular, the core of this began with the designation of the reservation of the Kaibab Paiute people in very far northern Arizona as a dark sky community about 10 years ago. And I was with what was then the International Dark Sky Association at the time, and I managed the program that made that designation. So I worked a lot with the tribe in the run-up to receiving their designation. What was really interesting to me about that was, whereas people I worked with in other non-native communities had lots of interests in, why did they want this dark sky designation? Out here in the West, a lot of times it traces back to tourism. The thinking that if we have a dark sky label, if we're near a dark sky park, that it will draw people into this community. It's a good sustainable source of tourism. And the Kaibab Paiute really didn't have that in mind at all. In fact, they were really concerned about the fact that their younger generation was becoming increasingly distanced or disconnected from their sky stories, which are a huge part of their culture, as they are for a lot of Native Americans. And they wanted to honor that tradition and try to continue the conditions that they have on their land, which are now fairly dark because of their location. They wanted to preserve that. There are lots of reasons that people value the night sky. Certainly, tourism and economic opportunities are one of them. But for many of them, it's a matter of their culture or their religion and their practice in their culture or their religion. And at the same time, indigenous people have often been left out of the decision-making that has impacts on the quality of their night sky. And they usually don't have the political power or the political capital to push back on those decisions. So for me, this really stands out that the Native community is beginning to take this on for its own reasons in a way that doesn't necessarily match up with some of the other motivations people have for protecting dark skies, but it's so central to their culture that they think this is a point of pride. This is something we want to share with the rest of the world. And it's really catching on, especially out here in the West. And considering that a number of the tribes, especially in the Four Corners area here, have jurisdiction over extensive land, that the more that they're building in dark skies to their cultural practice, their legal traditions, et cetera, we can really protect a lot of territory that way. And I think that sends a really powerful message to the rest of the world.
Okay, what do they look to night sky for?
Night sky to them is not only place, but it is ancestor. It is a spiritual companion. The night sky is reflective of a world that's very real to them. In many cases, their stories about the night sky, the folklore associated with it, are so special and so important to their culture that either they won't talk to non-native people about it, or if they do, they can only tell those stories during certain times of year because the traditions are so focused on the nature of those stories and how they interweave with the seasons and, agriculture and hunting and the things that were essential to Native people in the time before European contact. And they've managed to maintain those traditions. So I think they look at the night sky very differently than we do, who are descendants of the Western tradition, in a way that we can't even properly understand, to be quite honest. Like, I have a grasp of what it means to them, but I don't think I really understand it at my core. I have a huge amount of respect for that it could be so important to people that they take this loss of the night sky because of light pollution very seriously. It's not a superficial concern for very many of them. And I think that's worthy of great respect.
It's survival for them, right? It's like if you read about, before people could write and communicate, this was their calendar, this is how they planned the year, this is what. So it's even probably even more basic than what we understand. They don't have the same kind of media that we have exposure to. So if you rely on reading the sky, what's going to come in 2 months and whether you're going to have rains or not, that's a lot more important, I guess, than just lying there and enjoying all the beautiful stars that you see.
Yeah, during my research for the book, I was learning about the Maori people of New Zealand. And at the time, they were really leading the push to get the country designated with dark sky. I'm curious of where that stands. I remember them talking about this really as kind of a fight against cultural genocide for basically the same reasons. Yeah.
I can say, a little bit about that. Yes, in short, and the interaction between the native people, the Maori in New Zealand, and the European descendants is really fascinating. In some respects, I think they're ahead of where we're at, where Canada is at in terms of dealing with their indigenous population. They're still sorting out a lot of the legacy of colonialism. And that plays out in economy, it plays out in education. They've been fighting for the Maori language, for example. And so there is an interest in trying to come up with something like a label of Dark Sky Nation to represent New Zealand. Interestingly, when we made the announcement of the Kaibeb Paiute designation, we played that up in a certain way, calling it a Dark Sky Nation in the sense that here is a group of people who have sovereignty. They have a common language, common history, culture. They're kind of defined as a nation, and they should be recognized as that. So it's not just a community, it's a bit of a bigger structure. And there's still a lot going on in New Zealand toward that end. It's gotten wrapped up a bit in politics. Their situation is changing very much like ours is here in North America, with some difficulties in terms of political polarization. But I think there's still strong support for this. And one of the manifestations of that is recently New Zealand made a national holiday out of Maori tradition involving what they call Matariki, which to us in the West are called the Pleiades. And they reckon the start of their year in Maori society by the appearance of the Pleiades or Matariki in the morning sky in June, just before the sunrise. And everybody goes out at around that time to try to see if they can see the stars against the twilight sky. And for them, that's an indication that the new year has begun. And now that's a national holiday in New Zealand. And Maori and non-Maori people alike are rallying around this, and they're having events, centered on it in June. And it's a nice way, I think, of bringing that sky tradition back in a sense and helping focus the nation's attention on this issue and thinking, well, if you're in Auckland and your skies are badly light polluted and you're trying to see these faint stars against the twilight sky, maybe that gets you thinking about the nature of that light pollution and how it's having an impact on culture.
That's a good point, John. And we've seen some good positive stories come out of New Zealand. It's a shame to hear that they're going down that same political rabbit holes that it seems like the rest of the world is starting to circle around. Let's shift away from the cultural piece there. I think that was a really great discussion on culture. And thank you, John, for really bringing some detail into some of the Native American and the indigenous issues around the world, because it really is something that I know I can read about and I can understand somewhat, but I've never worked hand in hand with any of these groups. So it's good to see a kind of a first person perspective on some of the real plights that they have in their communities with regards to losing the night. Well, working our way over to the policy world around here, I found this article. This, I think, came from, John, your database that you have out there. It's a really interesting look at how pervasive and how quickly we can lose our night. And it's important to note that this article, it's a preprint, it hasn't peer reviewed. So should anything change in final version, I'll circle back to it. I just want to bring up some of the pieces of it because I think they're interesting. This study attempted to identify how to protect dark sky areas via a decision tree model. It looked at Thailand, the UK, Chile, and Botswana, and to understand how nighttime fared over 11 years in these countries, to which Thailand is losing pristine dark skies relatively quickly versus the other three. The main finding appears to be that the most important variable here is not how big the population is or how big the annual GDP is, but rather public policy. I was suspicious of the claim that GDP didn't impact light at night, or at least didn't impact late at night as much as its claims. So I did just some back of the envelope calculations based on the numbers from the study and based on GDP numbers, looking at the numbers for the GDP change from 2012 to 2023, and found that a 30% increase in GDP for Thailand, which was the largest economic improvement of all four of the countries, though Chile came in second with a 25% increase. Botswana came in third with 23% increase, and the UK finished last with a 15% increase. It's more indicative of a rich, entrenched nation. I compared the study's findings of lost night by country between 2012 and 2023 and found that Thailand lost about 0.5% of its dark skies for every 1% of GDP. And then the skies for UK actually improved by almost 0.1% for every 1% of GDP. And Chile was kind of negligible about the impact of GDP. And in Botswana, it was similar. The GDP really didn't impact dark skies, for which, to me, the logical conclusion seems to be that common sense policies can hold some of these skies intact. They can hold some of that darkness intact if we have policies set in place you can have growth while also having responsible policies, and that darkness will remain. Am I on the right path here, John? What are your thoughts on this?
I think there's reason to believe that you can have economic growth and you can reduce light pollution, and that those are not diametrically opposed things. That said, we think there's a general correlation between GDP change and the change in the amount of light that countries are emitting. My colleague Chris Kaiba in Europe led a study several years ago looking at satellite data across the world and found that correlation held up pretty well, especially in developing countries, to where we were seeing the greatest gains both in GDP as well as light emissions about the same time in the first half of the last decade. But it's important to note that that's not identified as a causal relationship. It's no one can say for sure whether is the light leading and the GDP is following behind, or does it the other way around? Is there something having to do with economic growth generally that leads to more light? Because we see, as you point out, with these countries, there's a diversity there, right? And in some places, it looks like as GDP increased, light pollution decreased somewhat, which may just be a reflection of the organized dark skies efforts, which are pretty extensive in the UK compared to other countries like Botswana and Africa. It could be a case where light is being conspicuously consumed. And what I mean by that is we've seen some of the largest increases in places like Africa, which in the map in the picture behind me looks mostly dark. But, when I show this picture, I always say there are 1 billion people who live in sub-Saharan Africa, and many of them have not received electricity yet. But when they do, they jump over older lighting technologies and they go straight to LED, which is great because it's very energy efficient, as a lot of people know. But if something is cheap to consume because it's very efficient, our tendency, especially in the West and with Western influences, to consume more of that thing. And if there is a belief that there aren't really a lot of downsides to that, which I think most people would think that more light at night outside, if it's cheap, is probably better. And if you are a developing country, it almost kind of puts your country on the map, literally, if suddenly now you can be seen at night because you can afford to waste a resource, which is, I think, where some of that comes from. But as far as we know, we have not seen any evidence that being cautious about the use of artificial light at night and reducing light pollution somehow leads to an economic drag, whether you're a wealthy country or whether you're a developing country.
So there's really no good studies out there to prove out either way on that.
There aren't, but there are people who are interested in this, and there are economists that are looking at it. Part of it is that we lack good data sources in some respect, but we've also not really systematically studied the efficacy of the policies in a way that connects up with economy. So right now it's still sort of a hypothesis, but my gut tells me that what we're going to find is that, again, you can have growth and you can reduce light pollution at the same time. It's not an either or question.
Yeah. And how much comes into play about the type of LED they're choosing? And speaking with folks again for the book, it's the cheapest standard LED is the one that's emitting the brightest, bluest light, right? And that makes me wonder, and I think this is exactly what you're alluding to, but that it's not necessarily a linear relationship with economics, that, you're going to get more light, but maybe at a certain point in an economy, it turns into a luxury to have a dark sky, which we're seeing play out in some various areas like Sun River, Oregon, a place I visited, which is sort of a high-end community that really respects their night sky. But yeah, so maybe not such a linear relationship. And we think about tunable LEDs that can protect the night sky as well as our health a little better than those standard LEDs. And yeah, we're in the policy. Is that conversation? Are we talking tunable, around the world yet? Or are we still kind of back at the beginning with standard LEDs?
We're still talking about standard LEDs for most cases, okay, even though the tunable technology is out there, which I think is a really wonderful option. We're not doing nearly enough through the use of lighting controls, of which the tunable LED is part of that. Things like being able to dynamically vary the brightness of the light during the night or switch lights off where they're not needed. And your intuition about the wealthier countries is right, because in the same data from the study I was describing earlier, there looks like there's a little bit of a turnover among the wealthy countries in the West, and that they've slowed down a little bit as LED has kind of reached market saturation. There's not a sort of never-ending demand like we're seeing in other parts of the world. And one of the hypotheses for that is exactly what you suggested, is that darkness becomes a valued resource to some people, to the extent that they're willing to spend a little bit more to have more of that darkness, which means doing their lighting better.
Lynne, since you mentioned a dimmable, right, we have this story from Leicestershire, England, which completed an 18-month pilot, dimming nearly all of the 68,000 or so streetlights within the county, with town centers excluded, to 30% of their maximum brightness between the hours of 8 p.m. to 7 a.m. Councillor Charles Whitford is quoted by the BBC as saying, "We know people have had some concerns ahead of this trial, but the data has shown promising results." The council claimed that it did not receive formal complaints during the test period, nor did the accident rate increase. It gets a little fuzzy where I wasn't able to find the 18-month trial study, so I'm relying on some local media to kind of detail what they found. And apparently, Leicestershire Live reported that in an undetermined time period during this trial, accidents did decrease by 14 from 64 to 50, but serious injuries increased by 9 from 17 to 26, with at least one death, increasing the overall rate of injuries per month to 1.42 pre-trial to 1.67 during the trial period. And those appear to be biker driver related injuries. So the plan that was derived was because of budget crunches, right? This is usually when we see a lot of innovative thinking around how we want to handle our streetlights. The council is realizing an estimated £90 million shortfall. I'm not sure how much that holds to the narrative of when you realize that this plan can only save you £500K over the next 4 years, but it's a step in the direction of trying to control some of their expenses. And it appears to be more of an environmental policy decision than a financial decision, because the council plans to put it into effect in areas to help reduce the environmental impact while also protecting some of the walk zones, the crosswalks, and safety areas. So you have communities that, I know in UK, right, you have communities that are shutting off lights that aren't necessary at all, and to keep in main high accident areas with lights. And this community is reducing the light volume over a span of certain hours at night. And John, I know you have experience with this out in Tucson. They do this kind of modulating light. I guess to Lynne's point, if countries are leapfrogging technology, why don't they pick up some of this state-of-the-art stuff that's out there right now?
It really comes down to cost at some level. I mentioned controls as a general aspect of lighting, and those are still usually optional. If you're buying a street lighting system, for example, and you mentioned Tucson, where we opted at higher initial cost to put in a networking system for controlling our streetlights that dims them during the overnight hours, so away from the arterial streets and the thoroughfares where there's the most traffic and away from where there are traffic conflicts at intersections. But in the residential areas and other parts of the city, the lights come down at night. Over the course of the lifetime of these lighting products, not only will the energy savings pay for that cost, but we think also it will increase the longevity of the lighting products in our very hot desert climate here, which is not good at all for LEDs and tends to shorten their lives, because they'll be able to run the LEDs at night at a slightly lower temperature because they're consuming less power. It's hard sometimes to get communities to see that benefit if they won't realize the full value for perhaps a decade. And the elected officials are looking at the balance sheet and they see a cost up front and they see what the expense of running the system, providing this service to the public every month at a certain figure. We really should acknowledge these concerns about nighttime safety. I know a lot of times that, whether it's here or England or other places, that the public has opposed some of these plans to switch off the lighting for part of the night or dim it, thinking that it will be less safe. The truth is that a lot of people who have those feelings, as much as we need to acknowledge them, they don't even see the nighttime world because they're not out in it. And so there's a psychology here that has more to do with a feeling of safety, a knowledge that even though I'm not out there, I'm not subject to this lighting and what it might, have an effect on my safety, but I feel better knowing that it's there and that it's on. And if they don't see both the good and bad of that, they may have a perception that is out of sync with reality. So I think this kind of comes back on us as advocates in our messaging to make clear that the intent is to improve nighttime visibility. We're not switching these lights off just for the sake of doing it. It's saving money for the councils that are running these programs. And by and large, I think the evidence has shown that they are pretty safe. And in fact, in some cases, things have improved when they have dimmed or extinguished lights during the overnight hours. But we have to address this issue of the connection to the feelings of safety. And that's a high psychological hurdle to get over, to be honest.
Right. And I think that's Leicestershire Live, when they went to kind of provide some color commentary, I guess is the best way to put it, for this policy. Their perspective was that you're making everything dark. I don't think 30% maximum brightness makes anything dark, because I've seen maximum brightness LEDs on my street. And you bring it down 30%, and we might get close to an old school normal headlight, but we're still probably way above that old school normal headlight. It feels like a lot of times they hear that you're turning something off, or you're reducing something, and it's automatically going to be the worst fear. And I guess, John, what communication would you give to people to say it's not the worst fear? You're making the lighting better in areas where it's needed. How do you convey that?
They've got to see it firsthand. And that's the trouble that we have. But most people have these perceptions and opinions based on their experience, which is very limited at night. Or they might drive through parts of a city or a rural area that legitimately need more light. And there are cases that we see where intersections and situations are not as lit as they should be, to be perfectly honest, because we do know that there is some connection between illumination levels and traffic safety, especially in places like intersections where traffic comes together from different directions. So in those cases, they might have formed an opinion based on just what amounts to a very bad lighting scheme. If I could take all of these people by the hand and bring them out into the field and show them examples of the kind of lighting that we're advocating for, that they would see firsthand how much better they can see the world under those conditions, I really feel like they would gravitate towards lighting that is better for the environment, better for the night sky. But they have perceptions that are based on seeing really bad installations of lighting and really kind of terrible applications of LED. And that's it's a big obstacle for us to get over. I kind of wonder, and this is where I'd like to ask Tatsiana a question, is could we lean on the public's love for things like birds, environmental elements, and say, wow, our nighttime environment could be so much better and we could preserve public safety because people love birds.
Love birds, especially in England. Actually, I was thinking about, I spend a lot of time in England, and they have cameras, a lot of cameras everywhere. As humans, our psychology, we really don't like to waste money, right? So if you can also show that here's the streets and you've got the cameras, and for 5 hours during the night, there's not a single car or a person, you are literally just burning your money by having those lights on, right? So that's one of the things. Another thing's England again, big gardeners. So there are a lot of moths, right, that work at night, and they pollinate specific plants, right, that's all of us gardeners love. Well, if it's too bright outside in your garden, those moths are not going to go and pollinate your flowers, so you're not going to have a very good garden, and that's going to be your reputation in your neighborhood, and so on and so forth. So this is just a few things, appealing to that you are actually wasting all your efforts having this beautiful garden. You are wasting your money by having those lights that no one actually needs. And then the birds, of course, like a trend here, it just kills me. I take my dog out around 9:30, and all of a sudden, it's a lovely neighborhood, but people decide that we need to absolutely light up trees. So you walk and you got these beautiful pine trees where probably some birds are sleeping for the night, but they've got this light installed right on the ground and shining all the way up into the sky. And I just cannot understand, what is the purpose of this when you are sleeping in your bed and you're just not letting your birds rest? Because I can hear birds, in my cedar hedge when I take the garbage out too late, and they get disturbed by me just making that noise. So there are a few things. And, I've a program here that we've run. We talk about Christmas lights and lights out and curtains. And we had a lot of people who say, thank you, because that way I can go and talk to my neighbor who leaves her nights on all night long. And I had no idea how to approach this, because not only it's keeping me awake, but it's also, we both love to feed birds, but, I turn all my lights off and you leave yours all night long. So yeah, a bit comical, but it's true.
Yeah, it's true. And it's got worse with LEDs and cheap energy.
Well, I'll speak for myself and so many people I know about the new LEDs being so glaring that I feel like there's a safety component there that I know has gotten some voice with Stoplights Foundation and others. So there's that. And then also in my research, reading about World War II and lights out, blackout mandates during that time. And if I recall, the studies done from there, maybe they found some small impacts on safety, but they seem to come up with some, interesting, pretty simple solutions. And I'm wondering if we've even thought about those, just like painting white lines, on streets. And I remember reading about them painting cows with white paint so they can be visible and not get hit. I don't know. I mean, so I feel like, history repeats itself in a lot of ways, but I'm wondering if there are lessons to be learned there that can be applied.
Well, the pandemic year, that spring, 2020, when we were all sent home, I mean, of course, our sales went through the roof, but all people being at home, but also there were just more migratory birds, just more birds, I don't know, surviving and not being hit. But we were just shocked how many birds we were seeing that spring. And we were not the only ones, right? So there was something about, offices being, I guess, maybe turned off, less traffic, even cars, like driving at nights. How many people are on the road at night? So yeah, we do need to turn those lights down at least a little bit. Yeah.
Then I was going to say, came across a story last month that I forget where it was, but they started painting glow in the dark paint on the side of their cows.
They're still doing that. That's wild. Yeah.
So it's out there.
It's out there. Okay. Good to know. Thanks.
Tatsiana, I think this is a great segue into this story from Georgia, which I mentioned a couple months back. There's a new Buc-ee's gas station that was put in Glynn County. For you at home not aware of Buc-ee's, Buc-ee's is something that's like central East Coast United States, and it's probably not where you're envisioning when you think of a gas station. You have to think of this as if Walmart married a truck stop, that is what we have here. We have a massive box store truck stop, essentially, and the facilities are massive. So in order to put these in, they need traffic controls because you've got so many cars that are getting off a highway going to this Buc-ee's. They created new lighting upgrades for Exit 42 interchange, where Buc-ee's is now sitting in this part of Georgia that is on I-95, which is a major highway that goes down the east coast of the United States. The light tower that they put in by the Georgia Department of Transportation was able to be seen 12 miles eastward by loggerhead sea turtle nesting sites on the north side of Little St. Simon's Island. And the Georgia Department of Natural Resources was able to, they noticed this. They took some measurements on it. In accordance with, I consider, human decency, GDOT, the Georgia Department of Transportation, Chief Engineer Meg Perkle requested Lynne County to shut down the lights between July through October during sea turtle nesting season. Well, of course, the story didn't end there. The county refused to comply and instead lobbed a counter request for proof of artificial light's impact on sea turtles, both to the Georgia Department of Transportation and to the Georgia Department of Natural Resources. Further, the county then claimed that they had no say in the matter of lights remaining on, insinuating that the Department of Transportation had the power to cut the lights. Previously, the county argued that the lighting tower couldn't be cut until exit ramp lighting was actually installed around the area, which occurred in July this past year. So before I toss it over to anyone who wants to jump in on this, John, I think you probably have some thoughts on it. Per the current, Perkle wrote a September 5th letter stating that the lighting, which is the newly installed exit ramp lighting, which the light towers initially were put in because there was no exit ramp lighting, provides sufficient illumination for safe navigation of the roundabouts. It's important to note that the high mast lighting is considered an interchange enhancement not required for the safe operation. Lynne County received the environmental impact details from the Department of Natural Resources on September 1st. John, we're seeing a lot of, I guess, this kind of pushback where, there's a story in Portland where Portland allowed a amusement park to set up lights to go straight up while they're in the middle of essentially a wildlife preserve area. The amusement park didn't really seem to have any care in the world. And they said, you know what, we'll change the color to yellow or something stupid like that. And that's going to somehow save birds. So what are your thoughts on this? Is this just progress? Like, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, what it brings to mind is, in particular from the legal aspect, and this is something I think we'll get into a little bit later as well, that we do not have really strong environmental laws, at least in this country, that specifically refer to light pollution. So to bring up light pollution claims in these contexts does not necessarily ensure that you will get some kind of good outcome, because the authorities can disregard them. It's true that for federal interstate highways and their interchanges, there are federal rules about lighting. They don't say that you have to put lights up on 180-foot masts or whatever. That's just, you're trying to light a large area with as few lights as possible because you're being cheap. There may be instances like this where you have to put more lights on shorter poles, which will do exactly the same job, in order to ensure that you're not also broadcasting light so far from the site that it's having a detrimental impact. And by the way, to Lynne County, I can give you a boatload of studies on sea turtles and their impacts as far as artificial light at night goes. So there's no question there. I can absolutely show you how detrimental it is to sea turtles. So that was probably not a good move because the State Department of Natural Resources can find that very easily, right?
John, I thought the same thing, but I mean, the Portland example was talking about birds, which again, I think the two biggest buckets you have on the ecology side are sea turtles and birds. Essentially, like their impact is the light's impact is almost indisputable at this point. And yet this is the ground that Lynne County's standing on, is trying to say we want to slow the process or try and make this a non-issue by talking that sea turtles aren't impacted by light.
That presumes that at the end of the day, no one cares about this. And I think that presumption is in the minds of planners, elected officials, engineers, honestly, that they think that, well, so what? If there's an impact on sea turtles or whatever. Whether that is in fact the case and people do or don't care about it varies widely, of course. Again, I'm going to fall back on the political times we find ourselves in, where we have difficulty agreeing on anything. You get a group of 10 Americans to go outside and you ask them what color the sky is, and half of them will say a color other than blue, and they will fight you on that point because they're so convinced that it's something else. It's really hard to come in with facts to substantiate some of these claims we're making if we're dealing with people who will not listen to that. And again, if there were existing legislation on the books right now that said artificial light at night is a pollutant at certain levels and its use needs to be controlled accordingly, we wouldn't be having these discussions. Like there are equivalent environmental laws about other kinds of pollution. Even though we still have to go to court to fight those to implement the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act correctly according to the way that they're written. But we are just at a real loss here because we can't lean back against existing legislation that said this is a pollutant and it needs to be controlled.
We haven't had electricity long enough yet, give another 50 years, I'm sure it will be.
Maybe. I hope you're right.
I can hope.
I'm trying to be positive.
There is some good news from Australia. The petition EN 7346 obtained 12,144 votes, which cleared the threshold for parliamentary response. So nice work to everyone involved in Australian Dark Sky Alliance. It looked like they weren't going to make it up to only a day out from when the petition was going to close. But during that day, they exceeded the 10,000 vote threshold by quite a bit. That's great news. And finally, in the policy world, to get yourself caught up just on the case of Smith v. Mullins, which we've mentioned a few times on the show, better known as Leo Smith's case against the Connecticut court system. As of this podcast, the defendant, the Connecticut court system, has balked at being a party by claiming immunity in the case and also a lack of standing on the plaintiff's part. This extends into the discovery phase of the trial, whereby the court system has objected to providing discovery. To sum up how the case is going, a recent memorandum by Leo Smith reads, in response to a March 19th memo written by Judge Bizzuto, which kind of kicked this whole thing off, the defendants have taken an uncomplicated, straightforward issue and obfuscated it in order to misdirect the court away from the clear facts and well-established legal principles. Okay, let's go to something that's a little happier. And have you guys heard of this sleep tourism? John, you've probably heard of everything. You're nodding your head over there. Well,
yeah.
In our modern times, only in our modern times, do we have something called a sleep tourism. In fact, it's a new avenue of tourism that's been valued at $690 billion globally. And to put the definition of sleep tourism in decoded industry terminology, it's essentially the idea of relaxing resort vacation, but incorporating a slew of pseudoscience hacks and, of course, warm lighting. So you get some nice warm lighting there. That's good. Some of these facilities, which are more like clinics, include a full body assessment, blood work, acupuncture, cryotherapy, infrared saunas, and such, all while exposing to warmer colored light than traditional clinics. So it's nice, a little upgrade in lighting there. That's great. Some include daily activity calendars with sunset yoga and things like butterfly PT. Well, that's one of the pictures there, Tatsiana. You would like this. It listed this nice little resort right there in Thailand, I think it was, along a river with all the trees uplit. So
sounds divine. Yes, digital detox. We talk a lot about it here. That's become, because we're in Quebec, we still have a lot of wild areas. So that's become a big tourism here. People just leaving their phones behind and just tuning out completely. So yeah, I'm not surprised. This is another way of switching off completely.
These people are limited to 1 cup of coffee a day. I cannot partake in this. That's not going to happen. I got to say, I love Quebec's wild areas. That's one of the lures. Like you mentioned, this is my favorite and probably scariest mountain biking up in Quebec. And, it's a phenomenal province for all that wild space you have. But the tall gorges, right? The Hulk Gorge, that's such great areas. So you think it's just another avenue for people disconnecting? Yes,
absolutely. Life is busy. Life is crazy, and we're being bombarded by so much information, right? You just can't keep up anymore. Even in your job, right? Like in marketing, right? There's just so much, and plus you have kids and you're trying to take care of yourself. So yes, I totally understand that people need to find a way to go back in times where things were so much simpler in a way.
What if we provided the hotels with good sleeping arrangements, didn't put floodlights into windows, and took away all the indicator lights that were inside of the rooms? I think that would be a step.
Yes. Well, and there are more and more hotels that are, they're leveraging the whole circadian science realm and doing some of that. I should do an audit and see if they've actually handled the digital displays, because yes, that is a big pet peeve of mine. But they're playing with the warm lighting at night and the bright blue light in the morning, and probably using those fancy beds that adjust temperatures and all that, stuff as well.
I mean, I rarely ever stay at hotels, mainly because when I see a hotel, the outside looks so obnoxiously bright. I can't imagine sleeping inside of that place.
Yes. My colleagues laugh at me when I go and stay in hotels. I bring Band-Aids. So I put all those LED lights, on TVs that you can unplug, all the, not the thermometers, what are they called? The air conditioning things. They all have LED lights, and I cannot sleep. So I have to put all these Band-Aids over it so that I can have a completely black room. So, and then, of course, people leave their phones on, and I don't know how people get any sleep.
I like the Band-Aid idea. It's a lot better than a whole big roll of tape or something.
Tape is not thick enough because of that material inside, right? To kind of...
Yes.
Well, we had a couple months back, someone actually made there's a cottage industry of indicator light tape. You can go to Amazon, you can find a whole bunch of it, apparently. But do you think that it's partly, why do we need to go on vacation to do sleep? Is it just because of stress? Is that it? We need to we need to fly hundreds of miles to be able to go to bed?
If you live in the city and if you live in a condo or in apartments, right, it's easier for us, who live in the countryside, I guess. But even getting exercise, if people don't move, you have to exercise every day, right, to get a good night's sleep. So if you have nowhere to walk, where, a lot of urban areas, there's nowhere to walk unless you're on a highway. So it's just not possible. And that's part of this is what helps you sleep, is exercise.
Yeah. And I wonder most people's day-to-day requires going to work or school, in which you're indoors all day, not getting bright light, which we also know, as I write about, how important it is to get that bright light during the day to be able to sleep at night. So maybe going on vacation, they finally get outside and they can sleep. And so maybe we also associate vacation more with sleep for that reason too.
It's probably because they're rationed to one cup of coffee.
But if you don't have to stay awake for anything, why would you need any coffee?
It's the nectar of life.
I agree.
I was just going to add that being involved in the world of dark sky advocacy now for about 15 years, probably the most valuable lesson that's come out of this for me, especially in reading into the literature about effects on human health, is we undervalue sleep in our culture for our well-being. Similarly, as just what Lynne said, it's not just sleep, because we also need bright light exposure during the day. So as much as we need darkness at night, we need light during the day, and we're not getting that either. And probably the fact that there's an industry that's built up around this is just how close to the brink this way of living brings us, because we're so disconnected with the way that humans lived prior to industrialization and the development of electric light at night. But really seeing the value of sleep for the whole sense of well-being for the person, and sleep disruption, especially chronically, how it links up with the onset of various kinds of disorders and diseases. It has really caused me to think differently about a lot of things, ensuring that I'm getting bright light exposure during the daytime for some part of it. To Tatsiana's point about exercise, 100%, that's a great way to get that light exposure, especially if you do it early in the day. It's really great for entraining the circadian rhythm, but a lot of people don't have that opportunity, either because they have to be at work early and work inside of a building without a lot of daylight exposure, or they don't have the ability to go out and exercise somewhere safely in their community. And that's especially the case for people who live in poorer neighborhoods, and a lot of those people are people of color. So there's another element to this that I think speaks to socioeconomic status and class and all of those things in our societies, and how people who have access to resources probably, on the one hand, have access to better sleep, but maybe they lead more frenetic lives, and that's what's disrupting their sleep. So that would be really interesting to look into, is whether there's a connection in that sense. And, are people at the upper end of the scale suffering as much as people at the lower end of the scale?
Yeah, I just want to underscore.
I don't know, Lynne, do you know about that?
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. This is actually an area I've grown quite passionate about, this idea of light justice. So darkness deserts, daylight deserts, as you're alluding to. And it is very much the same or overlapping populations that are struggling to get that adequate bright light during the day and that adequate darkness at night, because they're living in homes that are more likely to be flooded with artificial light, whether it's, basement first floor apartments on a street or social housing complexes where they have these big, bright masted LEDs or even police floodlights, right? So they're getting that hit with all that light at night. And then during the day, they're probably working in a back of a house space or, a lower or a warehouse or something without access to that window to get that bright light during the day. So it's absolutely an issue. Actually, probably by the time this is airing, I have a piece out in The Guardian on this very topic. And it's definitely an issue I think we should be talking about more, because it's on top of everything else in the environmental justice, kind of world, and the inequities and exposures. I think this is one that's been overlooked.
Well, I think this has been a great talk today, guys. I really appreciate you guys coming on the show today. In true fashion, when I have a show that we have such great engaging conversations, we get to about half of the articles I have listed here. So if you're at home, if you see articles listed on the show notes that we didn't cover, it's because we didn't get to most of the articles in the show, which is great. Really appreciate you guys coming on the show. Tatsiana, why don't we have you plug where they can learn more about Brome, about what you're doing, try and see what's up on your end. I know you do a lot of talks and stuff, so.
Well, I'm sales and marketing. I'm the spokesperson for the company. So if you visit on our websites or our social media, you'll probably see me showing all the products right now. Right now, I was just filming a little piece about vertical gardening. So yes, it's we've built feeders that we're known for our squirrel buster feeders. It's kind of a peaceful way of deterring squirrels from eating all the bird seed. So, and we've been on the market for 20 years, and, birds are our customers. So we do anything possible to make sure that our birds survive and live a successful lifestyle. So, whether it's lights out or curtains closed or, not raking your leaves and building habitats, it's everything is built around feeding birds.
Okay, Lynne, where can people learn more about what it is going on in your life, and how can they find the Inner Clock?
Yeah, sure. So I have a website in which I list out every recent article and book information, and that is lynnepeeples.com. My book can be found anywhere you buy your books, whether that's, through the audio version or the print or the Kindle. It's out there. I really appreciate you having me on. This has been great. Thank you.
And John, is there anything new on your end? I know there's a lot coming up. It's November. Where can folks not just learn about what you're doing, Dark Sky Consulting, anything you're doing with Dark Sky International for maybe Under One Sky?
The sort of usual outlets. You can find me on my website, darkskyconsulting.com, where I have a lot of resources, a lot of bits of information about dark skies and light pollution. I write regular articles there about all aspects of it, from the research side to the advocacy part. I always encourage people to look at darksky.org. They're just a wonderful source of information about this, and follow them also on social media if you want to keep up with these issues.
And John, your LinkedIn is an excellent source of updates. So
thank you.
Yeah, if anyone's out there looking for some really good, pertinent takes on the topics at hand that are out there today, John's LinkedIn is a great source for that. So I want to thank my guests one more time. I also want to thank you, the listener. Thank you for joining us today. As a reminder, the show is listener supported. We rely exclusively on the support of you, the listener. If you like what you hear, why not support the show? And this episode of Light Pollution News was recorded on October 19th. You can learn more about today's show by visiting our website, lightpollutionnews.com. Keep an eye out for us on whatever social media channels you use. We're there. And thank you once again. I'm your host, Bill McGinney, reminding you to only shine the light where it's needed.